Year, a fresh start. It's January 2nd, 2024, and this is a work session of the Billings City Council. At our work sessions, our procedure is a little more informal. We do not take formal action except to give instruction to staff. The purpose is just to have a general discussion. We've got agendas back on that card if anybody needs one. You'll notice we're a little thin up here tonight, which is a bit unusual, but we have 4 council members who are traveling and are out of town, either intentionally or unintentionally because of weather delays tonight. So apologies in advance. That will impact our item number 1, our swearing in a bit, but we have still 2 incumbents who we do need to be sworn in. But before we get to our first agenda item, we'll have public comment on any item in just a minute. But before I do that, Chris, anything that you've got before I open it up for public comment?
Mayor and council, so in addition to obviously Happy New Year and all the holiday festivities that people had, thank you. We do have, of course, some calendar adjustments in January because of the holidays that fall on Mondays. So our next one from tonight is just a reminder that January 16, Tuesday, not the Monday. In addition to that, we'll be in a different location. We will be at the library having an additional public safety conversation. That public safety conversation will focus on crime prevention. So point being, no, we are not here on January the 15th. We will be meeting at our normal time at the library community room, first floor, on the 16th at 5:30. So just a reminder for that.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. And for members of the public, we will have an opportunity for public comment toward the end of each of these agenda items that are on our agenda this evening. But if you can't stick around until we get into that item, or you'd like to comment on something that is not on our agenda at all, we're going to give you an opportunity to do that. We'll also, at the very end of the meeting, give you an opportunity to comment on anything that's not on our agenda at all. So if you would like to be heard on any item and you don't want to wait, please come forward. Steve, we do ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and address up front.
Thank you, Mayor Cole, members of City Council and staff. Steve Simonson, Billings Association of Realtors, 2021 Overland Avenue. My question, I guess, is in regard to the West End water study that's underway, what the status of that is. I understand that the research has been done. We're waiting somewhere in the process for publication or a draft. I'm just wondering where that's, when that might be readily available for members of the public.
Okay, thank you very much. And after we have public comment, I'll ask if staff wants to comment, either to follow up with Steve or if they got a simple answer to that question. Any other public comment for us this evening? And again, we'll have an opportunity on each of these items on our agenda. No one's coming forward for public comment at this period, so we'll close the public comment, initial public comment period. Chris, I don't know if you can respond to Steve or you want to have somebody get back to him, but
I would suggest a brief conversation with Steve because I'm not sure if he's referring to our water reservoir project. I don't know if he's referring to state of Montana or other entities, water quality.
He'll
clarify.
So DNRC.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So it's in regard to the water quality study that's underway at the West End. I understand that the city was a sponsor for that. DNRC is involved as well as DEQ with that. And I just wanted to know when we might be able to see some preliminary or final copy of that. Thank you.
I can follow up on that. I do not have an answer to that sitting here tonight. So we can follow up and...
Debbie is here.
Debbie's got it. All right, Debbie. Thank you.
Sure. So that is a study that we're doing for the groundwater on the West End. And so still collecting a lot of data. We don't have anything yet that's developed, but it should be in the next, I would say, 6 months or so. We should have some of that compiled and some initial thoughts on what we're seeing.
Thank you, and I assume that there's some sort of a email list or distribution list for people who are interested, maybe?
I
And if
will
so,
make sure Steve gets on
Steve, want to make sure
Yep,
you're on that
for
list,
sure.
or any other members of the public.
And I think we will probably do some outreach with the West End task forces and some of the other stakeholders kind of in that part of our community.
Okay, so if members of the public are listening and they're interested in this, they should send an email to the Public Works Department or Debbie Melling, our Public Works Director.
Sure.
And, okay, very good, thank you. Okay, with that, then we'll move into our first item of business, which is always exciting. This is an opportunity to swear in both any new council members, both of whom are traveling, and we're not able to be here tonight. So we'll make arrangements either to have them sworn in by our city clerk, who apparently has the statutory authority to do that this week, or at our next business meeting in 6 days from now, which will require that we amend that agenda, because that agenda's already gone out, but that should be easy enough to do. But we still have, and we'll have to do that also for Councilmember Shaw, who's also traveling overseas. And but with that, we've got two incumbents, Council Members Neese and Councilmember Boyette, Ward 2 and Ward 5. So council members, we've got Judge Kolar. Judge Kolar, how about if I ask our two swearees, if that's right, to come forward, and you can do your magic with them. And maybe, I don't know if you guys wanted a picture, in which case we'll ask Chris to, or, Victoria's here with the real thing.
So, good, they have their own pens, I didn't bring a pen earlier today, so. So I'm gonna have you raise your right hand, both of you, and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear. Or affirm. That I will support. Protect. Defend. The Constitution of the United States. The Constitution of the State of Montana. The Charter of the City of Billings. And that I will discharge the duties of my office with fidelity. So help me God. So I'm gonna have, we have to sign two of these, because they're gonna need two of them. So let's sign one. Good. So if you guys are. Okay.
Years ago, I was in a cast. I had broken my wheelchair here.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. If I recall, I think you used I had one of my daycare blankets for my kids here. You had to use.
Right, and Roy helped me.
Yeah. So I'm gonna use this. And I will take these and give this to Denise. All righty, thank you guys. Yes, congratulations on your win, both of you guys. Congratulations.
Congratulations and welcome aboard again. The pay is the same, in case you were counting on a pay raise. That's then the conclusion of item number 1. We'll move on to item number 2, our disaster emergency services management update with our DES coordinator, Casey Williams. Casey, welcome to 2024.
Thank you, council. Thank you, mayor. Today is my 5th year anniversary for being your DES director and coordinator here. So today's
Time
a special
flies when
day
you're
for
having
me today.
fun.
Yes, absolutely. What I like to do for any of the new council members and for the old is about once a quarter, I try to update you guys on the things that we're working on, since I do actually work for you. So you probably ought to know what we're doing in DES. So real quick, the big ticket item that we're working on currently is the Emergency Management Advisory Council, which, and the city council, city administration, and the commissioners agreed that we would switch our mass notification platform from Code Red to Everbridge, which is the name of the system that we're going to be using. So that is underway. We've already purchased it. We have it installed. The ability to produce emergency notifications to our public never went any time without having that, so we did have the overlap. I am able to send emergency notifications to our public through the use of iPause right now. Over the next month or two, as we build the foundation of Everbridge, get the notification templates and the roles of who can do what within that system built out, I would hope that the council would continue to support that platform and its use across the city through all the different departments. This new mass notification system is capable of being an in-house internal customer notification system as well as our external to the public notification system. The cost for this is the same as it was for Code Red. The user interface is a little bit easier to use, and internally it's more robust and will help us do more with it, and it's a more efficient way to communicate across the board. So that's the number one big thing that we're working on right now. Second thing is a major milestone. We are rewriting our multi-hazard mitigation plan for our community. That plan has to be rewritten every 5 years, and it's one of the required plans that we have to have in place in order to qualify for federal funding. We're in the final stages of drafting, and once we get to the final draft, that will go to the city council members, our LEPC, the public, for final comment. I'm expecting that to happen probably within the next 2 months. We'll be getting that out so that we have that. And that's a big deal that we've been working with the state. That's taken about 18 months now to get to the point where we are now. We are also needing to update and rewrite our emergency operations plan for this year. I will be submitting a Homeland Security grant application to try to find funding to help us with that. So that's a project that's happening. That plan also has to be rewritten every 5 years, and 2024 is the year that we have to do that. So that's another big thing. When that's completed, it will go before you as well to accept it as the emergency operations plan for Billings. The other really nice big things is our grants. Currently, between the grants that we've received over the last 12 months and the grants that we've applied for over the last few months, we're at about $7.1 million worth of grants that we've either received or are waiting to see received. The most recent one, Phillips 66 Refinery, agreed to give us $4,000 to pay for a 1-year subscription to a globally known company that helps write incident action plans for both planned and unplanned events. That's a software. All of our energy companies, Phillips 66, Exxon, the pipelines, they all use this group to write their incident action plans. And then y'all probably seen those when you went through the class. We talked about them. So that's a really nice, generous gift that Phillips 66, we should receive that in the next 10 working days. So that was nice. We received $75,000 from the DNRC to rewrite our community wildfire protection plan, which was last written in 2006. So it's due. We've gotten $16,000 from DNRC for the volunteer fire capacity grant to help our volunteer fire departments with personal protective equipment and some of their expenses. We have expended our $130,000 from the emergency management grant that we get from the state. That grant opens up to be reapplied for tomorrow, and we will be applying for the maximum $130,000 again this year. And I don't have any expectation that we wouldn't get that. We've been able to get that for several years. We also recently received $250,000 to do a infrastructure and camera security system at the county courthouse. And I've been working with the city on preparing a Homeland Security grant for cybersecurity for the city of Billings. that grant opens up tomorrow to be applied for as well, and we'll be helping with that. We've gotten $757,000 for the Emergency Watershed Protection Grant. That helps the Miller, the BBWA, and the Huntley Irrigation do some work on their irrigation canals to help all of that. Pending, we have a $5.1 million grant through the city of Billings to help with diversion dams along the BBWA, one of which would be a diversion dam to help fill the new reservoir. We have $739,000 grant application for the BBWA for headgate and some other work that they need to do on those things. So all in all, $7.1 million, not bad. And I really appreciate all of the support from the city council, and I can't compliment Debbie enough on all of the work that she also does and her team to write some of these grants, and hopefully we'll get them, and that's for the betterment of the department. So in the very near future, you will be hearing more and more about the Everbridge mass notification system. And when it is time to roll that out for public enrollment, because like Code Red, you can opt into this system, we will be coming and asking for your support on the marketing stuff. And Victoria, your PIO, our PIO has done a real good job of being involved with that, and I'm sure we'll be able to do it. But your support for rolling that out to the public would be greatly appreciated. So talk it up between now and then. And really, council, if you ever want to see our strategic plan, please just let me know. I've sent that out. If you're ever interested in it, it goes through 28. I have that available to you. All of our other plans are online. And if you have any questions, I'm stand to answer the questions. Just wanted to give you an update.
Very good. Thank you, Casey. Council, questions about Everbridge platform, grant applications, any of these plans? Council Member Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. We had, at that last meeting you had discussed the possibility of having a test or a scenario where we would test the city of Billings.
Yes.
Is that still planned maybe for this year?
It is. I'm targeting April as the time. It would be a tabletop exercise, and what we would be trying to test is our continuity of operations plan and the city's ability to continue to do government work in the event that we had to vacate the premises for an extended period of time, much like they did in perhaps Palestine, if we have some type of an event that would displace us for a little while. So the target is April. I'm still working with the state on trying to get some people to help me write the scenario. Yes, sir.
Very good. Councilmember Denise?
Thank you, Mayor. Regarding Code Red now is going to be going away. What's the ETA on that, when that'll be transitioned fully?
Transitioned fully, I would say about 4 months.
Okay. Because I've just actually started getting used to Code Red, and it's been nice when I travel out to other areas, I'd get warnings
very
and
nice.
stuff in there. So with this new system, Everbridge, does it have an app as well that you download? And when you travel, will it notify you, or are you only going to get the city notifications?
No, it will travel, and if you go to any of the states or communities that have Everbridge, it would know that you had the Everbridge. And I would also encourage anyone who has Code Red, since it is free, to keep it, because as you travel, it will follow you. And between the two, you're probably covered in over 90% of the country.
Okay. And that's going to be my next question, is what percentage of the country is covered with this Everbridge versus Code Red? And what?
They won't tell me. So neither one. So Code Red historically has been the most widely used notification system of its type in the U.S. and Canada. That market share is rapidly being lost to Everbridge. Privately, for private organizations, for both of the hospitals currently here use Everbridge, and there's tons, thousands of private organizations that use it globally. Everbridge approaches it differently. So they have from what I've been told, more customers but not as many government customers, if that makes sense. Everbridge is starting to get into the market. They're the number 2, but they're getting into the market more and more, and even states are going, and I'll use Florida as an example. The entire state of Florida bought Everbridge for everywhere. So if you go to Florida, that every county in Florida uses Everbridge because it was purchased and divvied out by the state of Florida. That's becoming more and more popular, and the counties that use Code Red here are starting to transition away from it as well, just because the user interfaces of the newer systems are easier to deal with, and they're more robust.
And so I know with Code Red, there was a lack of people signing up for it, and then you couldn't get it, and that. How is that going to be different with Everbridge than Code Red? Is it still going to take the user having to give their phone number, or is there anything the city can do, because we have all of our city customers through the utility bills, phone information, things like that, that whether or not we are able or allowed to share it, but into an emergency system like that where it would capture that data and utilize it?
Right. So the problem of getting people to spontaneously sign up is the same regardless. So that is an issue that we're going to have to do a better job of marketing that to our public than we did with Code Red. The upside, I guess, is there's almost 10,000 people that are already signed up with Everbridge through their employer here in the county. And I've already had discussions with St. Vincent Healthcare, and I will follow those up with Billings Clinic, since they use that and every one of their employees is required to have it. We have that's like an automatically built-in database. And then if we can get the city employees and the county employees to also do it, we'll come out of the gate with several thousand more people than we did with Code Red to begin with. Plus, if we'll use the system for things other than just emergency notifications, we'll get more buy-in as well.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Casey. That's the question I was going to ask is, people never think there's going to be an emergency, but they're really concerned about when they have to put their trash out, or whether their street's going to get plowed
Absolutely.
tomorrow or Thursday, you know. So how do we make this thing applicable to the day-to-day needs of government and public information about government? And is that something you can answer, or do we need to be asking Debbie Melling or Chris Mikulski that, or
So
all
it's
three
it's a
of you?
group effort, right? I focus on the emergencies. The system is designed to be both internal and external facing, so that the user groups from Public Works can send out any number of messages, whether it's street plowing or trash pickup, or we're going to have the Strawberry Festival dates, or whatever those are. We have the ability to do it. For the people that are opting in, they will have the choice of, I want to know about emergencies, and I want to know about plowing, and I want to know about garbage, but I don't care about, so it's an option of, I want to know about these notifications, I don't that. And it's totally up to us as to how we build it and use it. It's designed to do exactly what you asked. It's just up to us to use it in that manner.
Okay, very good. Anything else for Casey? Casey, the $7.1 million number that you mentioned that are grants that we've either received or have been awarded and will receive, that was over what time period approximately?
If, from the last 12 months, so in 2023. So we have $6 million of that is we're waiting on, that should be coming up in February, March-ish. We should know about those. And then tomorrow, the State Homeland Security Grant and the Emergency Management Performance Grant both open up. So we'll be applying for those two grants again, starting tomorrow.
Okay, so I misspoke. These are the things that we hope to get, not necessarily dollars we have received.
So we've received about 3. over the last 12 months, because we applied for some of them earlier than 12 months ago. We have $6 million, just under $6 million pending that we're supposed to know the answer to in February or March. And then we have an additional round that we will be applying for tomorrow. But the 7.1 is the $6 million that we should know something about next month. And then the rest of that we've received already.
Okay, very good. Okay, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. When we rolled out Code Red to the public, it seemed like a very slow process, but maybe I'm mistaken. That was just my impression, that it took a while for people to catch on. And then when they tried to sign in and sign up, there was a kind of a two-track system where some people eventually fell out because they would have an update or whatever, and their number didn't continue to stay in the system, and they ended up falling out, which happened to me. So I was going to ask, is Everbridge going to, as part of the service or package that we're buying, do they have any help that they do in terms of having people sign up?
They don't necessarily help people sign, I mean, they have customer service, which can help. They do give us marketing templates and things that help, and best practices and things that we should do to encourage and help people sign up. And I think different from Code Red, of course, we had Code Red before I got here, so I can't speak to the first year of Code Red. I'm just not familiar with it. But one of the reasons I'm very hesitant and I want to roll it out to our general public last is because I think with Code Red, we didn't build a good foundation. And my goal here is to build the foundation and work the kinks out and get it really solid within the city and the county, then go to the public with it, because I think we'll have better success with that. And then really focus on the marketing of it and the education to the public of what we need to do with it.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Appreciate it, Casey. We'll ask if there's any public comment on this item number 2.
Thank you. Merry New Year.
Yes, Merry New Year. If anybody'd like to comment on the DES emergency management update, please come forward. Just ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes. Any public comment on this item? No one's coming forward, no one's online, so we'll close the public comment, move on to item number 3, our water and wastewater modifications in Chapter 26 of the Billings, Montana City Code.
Okay, Mayor and Council. So this is a presentation about some ordinance changes that we are proposing for Chapter 26. And there it is. Yes, I was making fun of you, and now, yeah, thanks. Anyway, so there's some ordinance changes that we're proposing for the water and wastewater utility section of the city code. We have taken this to the Budget and Finance Committee. They said it was a really great presentation, so settle in. It's a good one. Okay, but I do have changes in here that were recommended by the Budget and Finance Committee that I'll talk about as we get to those pieces. So when you look at the ordinance, it dovetails with some rules and regs that we have that are administratively adopted. So the first sentence of the water and wastewater utility section of city code says the city administrator will promulgate and publish rules and regs for the operation of the water and sewer utilities. So the reason this is important is because we have these two documents or policies that basically have to work together, but we try not to create a lot of overlap, because if you do that, you tend to create problems. And so we haven't revised our rules and regs since 2017, and there's quite a few things that have changed in how we do service, and so we wanted to update those, and of course, that means we had to update some of those sections of the code with it. The two major components of this that change are the reimbursement agreements, which we've talked about many, many times here, mostly when it comes through annexation. We've talked about that, and so we're trying to bring that practice kind of throughout the whole any reimbursement or any kind of connection to our system. And the second thing is we have a few billing process changes. They're not major changes, but kind of how we've morphed over the years. This kind of catches up everything and has it more in line with what we do. So there are some cleanup things, and I'm just going to touch on these quickly. These are not major. They're just, like I said, we're coming back to do an ordinance change, so we figure we might as well clean everything up while we're in there. Stormwater is the first one. In 2010, we put stormwater reimbursement in here. So we had the water and sewer rules and reimbursements. We added stormwater. And then in 2015, we took out half of those references. So I'm not sure why we didn't take them all out, but we didn't. So right now, we're trying to get that stormwater all out of here, and then we'll add whatever's applicable back in the stormwater section of the ordinance or the city code when we bring that back this spring, summer. So it will be in there, just not in this section. Annexation terminology, as you know, it changed. It used to have the red, orange, and yellow area, I think it was. And those changed, the wording on that annexation changed to different levels. So we just caught up the terminology in our section with that. Definitions between the rules and regs and the city code were a little bit different on some things. Again, we just really wanted to make that consistent throughout both documents so that we didn't have some kind of problem that we were creating. And then the billing, there's some cleanup things, just saying basically on your bill, you'll see water, sewer, solid waste, and this is what it'll look like. And if you make a partial payment, it goes to this or that. So again, just some of those things to clean up our billing, to put it within our practice of what we're doing. Now we get to some of the changes that really have a lot of meat to them. Backflow prevention is probably one of the most important things we do. For those of you not familiar with it, it means we have to put basically mechanical, sorry, I'm thinking of the word here, appurtenances, in line in those services so that water doesn't come back from private property into the public main and then go to another property owner. So you don't want to be drinking something that came out of your neighbor's house or business. And so cross connection and backflow is really, really important. It's a huge liability for us. We don't have strong language in the current ordinance or in our rules and regs. And so this is basically saying you have to do this. And we have testing requirements, and we have requirements that say what that has to look like. And so all this does is give us a little bit of teeth for people that maybe aren't following those good rules. They are in the plumbing code, so they need to be doing it, but it still gives us teeth to be able to make sure that we're protected. Well, that's a terrible slide. So the reimbursements, I'm going to talk really generally about what the process would be, and then I'll show what changes in the ordinance. So the way it would work is that every time someone connects to a water or sewer line, if they didn't pay for it, they need to pay for their proportional share of that. So whatever that lineal footage of their frontage is, they have to pay. So if the city put that in at any time, we'll talk about that a little bit, they would need to pay based on that 2-year calculation. And that would be, we keep track of how much it costs to extend water lines, sewer lines, curb gutter, everything. And so what we would do is we'd have a 2-year average of what it costs, and you would pay that for your connection. If a private entity funded that extension, the city would pay them back. If there's an agreement in place, we go according to whatever the agreement is. If there's not an agreement in place and if they meet the terms of the reimbursement section of the ordinance, then we would pay them back. And then that is also based on that 2-year calculation. So basically it takes out the reimbursement agreements. We don't like having different rules for every pipe in town. This would clean that up and basically say, if you connect, there's somebody you're going to pay back, and this is what it looks like. I skipped over the 30 years because the Budget and Finance Committee didn't like 30 years, and frankly, neither does staff. So we proposed 30 years because there was a lot of conversation with legal about what's defendable, what does the statute say. The statute is basically silent on this. So, and Gina's here tonight, and she would love to answer any questions about this. But basically, the 30 years is very loosely based on the SID policy. And the SID policy basically says that you can't fund something for longer than the life cycle of that improvement. Pipes last 100 years. If it's 100 years, we're going to go replace that pipe. So when somebody connects, they're always going to have access to the pipe out there. So we would like to see it be forever. The Budget and Finance Committee thought forever is the right number. So that can certainly be a conversation that we have this evening. So to make sure that our city code lines up with that process, this is what we put together. These are very simple conditions, and I can go through them really quickly, but basically it says, if you extended the pipe, and you make sure that your address is current with us and your contact information is current with us, and it costs more than $10,000 and you met our rules, then you will get paid back. So that means in 60 years, if somebody connects to a pipe you put in and you met all the rules and you've kept up with us and you told us where you live, and we're going to pay you back for that. And then the reimbursement of payments, again, we simplified a lot on this, but it says if you connect to a pipe that you didn't pay for, you're going to pay a cost that's based on what the rules and regs. That number is going to change every year, but it is going to be based on that formula that we talked about. So in the existing city code, it says in no event will reimbursement payments exceed the amount you paid. So if you're a developer and 20 years ago, you put in a piece of pipe and it was $5,000, today we wouldn't be able to pay you back more than $5,000 because of the way this says this. But if you invested your money 20 years ago at $5,000 and someone comes in and connects to that pipe, they will pay today's price for that. So if you assume, went up 4% a year, 3% a year, whatever, you're going to get back on your investment today's cost for that. So that's how that reads the way we have it written. And in here, there's the 30th, it changes from 10 years to 30 years. We would like to change that to no limit on that time frame. And it's not going to move. Okay, so that was it for the reimbursement. Ditches, there's a section of the city code that says that we want ditches to be closed if not more than 10% of people are using it. We actually don't necessarily want this. We have storm drainage and drainage and groundwater drainage and that kind of thing that goes into a lot of our ditches and drains. So we want the ability to look at that and decide, do we really want those to go away or not? So instead of forcing it, it's really more of taking this out so that we can make those decisions based on each one individually. So that's why that's in there. I did just put this to touch on the rules and regs. We're not going to go through them because they are, Chris will sign these, but I did want to talk about some of the things that we changed in there. One, we eliminated redundancy. So we had a lot of things that were written 2 and 3 times in there and the city code in different places. So we eliminated a lot of those redundancy, which helps us keep some of those errors down. We clarified the billing process. Primarily in here, it was things like how you initiate service, what your bills look like, some of the rules on deposits, for instance, some of those things. So just cleaning up some of those things we haven't done in the last 7 years, 6 years. FOG is fats, oils, and greases. We used to allow those at the wastewater plant. We do not anymore. They go up to the landfill, so we have to clean that up in the rules and regs. Private construction acceptance is one that has been really tough for us. When contractors come and build a new private development or a subdivision, we used to get pretty poor quality. In the last 10 years, we've put in place some testing requirements, some acceptance requirements, and what this does is just kind of formalize those in a document versus just, right now they're on the permit where it says you can build this, but you have to live according to this. So this is just putting it all in one place. The reimbursement agreement, like I said, that every 2 years when we calculate that 2-year average, the rules and regs will actually have that calculation in there. Alternative sewer requirements, we do have some people that use a low pressure sewer. We don't like them. People don't like them in their homes, so we're pretty particular about what's used. So this just lines out where those work and where the requirements allow you to do it. That way everybody's on the same page. Backflow, again, like I said, this kind of takes, you have to do it and tells you what you have to do. And trucked and hauled waste, again, just putting some of the rules in place that we have not had formalized for several years. So that is my presentation. I know there's going to be questions and comments, so this is time.
I'm sure we'll have some. We'll start on here. Councilmember Ripsis, Councilmember Joy, Councilmember Gulick.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Debbie. I can see why the Budget and Finance Committee loved that. That was amazing.
Yes, I know. Well,
Just
that's
a
the
couple-
topic I was given, so.
A couple of quick questions. The backflow prevention, the way that's written, it makes me think that somebody's going to have to go to every house in the city and test it every year. Is that?
So most houses don't necessarily have backflow, it's the businesses. So houses, it's built into your meter. And so we do test those, and the meters are ours. So this is mostly businesses, commercial entities. And instead of us going and testing, what we're going to do is send something out every year that says, did you get it tested? Send us your documentation. And so it'll be more administrative on our part versus physical.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then could you, on the reimbursement, I thought I was following your example until you started throwing, 3 or 4% return in there, and then
Okay.
you say they get it back. So if they do it 20 years ago, are they going to be able to get more than what they originally paid in? Because you're right, that original investment would be a lot more today. So how does that work?
Exactly. So we saw that, I don't know, was it 2 months ago when we brought South Billings Boulevard in, and we had extended that water line there in 2008, and we got $5,000 back, which at the time, that's what we paid for it. Today, you probably would have paid $50,000 or $60,000 for that. So the city put that money in. When we're replacing that line, it's going to cost us $50,000 or $60,000. And so the way that we're going to do that calculation is it is the average of the last 2 years of water line and construction. And so, yes, a developer that put something in 20 years ago could be paid back more than they actually paid on the line. They get paid back in today's value.
Okay. All right, and then just one more. Since you're opening up this whole can of worms, I noticed in in one of the sections that it says reservoirs are banned for swimming. And I know that in the new reservoir, I think we were planning to have a beach or something out there. So I just wondered, it was 26-117,
Okay.
number 4.
Well, I have bad news. No, I'm
Just for
kidding.
looks. The beach is just for looks.
We're gonna swim. We're gonna swim. Okay, I see that. Bathe, swim, or wade. Yeah, I might have to put some rules in there,
If you
though.
were opening it up, thought maybe
Okay.
you want to put that in there too.
Absolutely, we'll note that. That's a
Thank you.
good point.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Actually, I wanted you, this is a very specific item about our rules and regs, but I was wondering if you could just maybe for the public and people who are here, explain again why it is we want to have a stormwater utility. And I think this deals is not really about that, but since we're talking about it, and I notice some people have come, maybe you just want to just give a short little explanation. Why do we want to have a stormwater utility? We do, but explain a little bit more about that.
So our next item is the stormwater item. Is it okay if I do
gosh,
that?
Okay, yes, sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry,
I can
didn't
switch
realize-
gears, but
No,
it-
no.
Okay.
I forgot.
we'll
Sorry.
start though with that baseline.
Start with that, thank you.
Okay, we'll do.
Good, thank you. Councilmember Gillick?
Just in terms of like the backflow requirements or standards or things like that, are they, when we put them in our ordinance, and I confess, I didn't actually open the hood like Councilmember Ripsis did. So are they going to be kind of more performance-based or like something that as standards are updated, we don't need to keep changing our language? Like it's not prescriptive. Is that fair to say? Like you'd be referencing, you need to have, I don't know if that applies to plumbing, but it'd be UL approved,
Right.
something like that.
Yep, exactly. So our, what we do in this ordinance is we refer to our cross-connection and backflow documentation. And so as those standards change, we'll change that and keep up with the industry. Yep.
One other follow-up question then. So with the reimbursement piece, you did mention, right now there's a lot of agreements that you have to maintain. So clearly from a city administrative perspective, it's beneficial to change what the status quo is. How about from a developer's perspective? How does this impact them?
So I think it's twofold. A lot of times a developer comes in and they have to extend that line at their cost. And then the adjacent property owner waits 8 years or 11 years now, and then they don't have to pay anything. And so a lot of our developers put a lot of money out on the table to come into the city in a place where maybe we don't have utilities yet. And we want them in the city. So we want to encourage that ability for them to get paid back on that instead of, the county development on the outskirts of the city. So for the developers that come in and they pay for those water lines and sewer lines, I think this is a really positive move. For developers that come in and we're going to wait 11 years or some amount of time, that's not going to be possible anymore. They're going to have to pay for that. In talking with a lot of the developers, what they've told us is that we want to know what the cost is up front. So the nice thing about doing it like this is they don't have to find out, is there a development agreement? Is there not? What was the amount? They're going to know. It's right there in black and white. So when they come in to do development, we can clearly say, this is the cost, this is what you're going to have, and they know what to expect moving forward. So I think there's a good side of it, but obviously it's a cost that they don't have today necessarily if they wait long enough.
But it does make a more predictable environment for
Right.
development to occur. Okay, thank you.
Which we hear is very important, and I get. If you're going to enter into something, you want to know how much it's going to cost.
Debbie, I'm just going to raise an issue, and I'll pass it to Councilmember Neese, just something, you don't have to, if you're not ready to comment on this, don't feel like you have to, but in case you want to. In the definitions section, so there's a set of general definitions in 26104 that applies to this article, which I guess would be the general article, and then also rules and regulations authorized hereunder. And in that section, it has the definition of a customer. And actually, there wasn't a definition of customer. It's been, the definition of user has been changed to say user or customer. And it applies, so a customer is somebody who receives municipal water, wastewater service directly from the municipal water supply. In the reimbursement section article that is 26500, there's another definition section. And in that one, there is a definition of customer, and it says anybody who receives water or wastewater service either directly or indirectly from the city water wastewater system. So one is you have to receive it directly, and the other one is you can receive it directly or indirectly. And my particular antenna goes up when I start thinking about the Heights Water District, because obviously all of the customers of the Heights Water District are receiving water from the city indirectly. And I'm not sure to what that means, if that creates certain unintended consequences that we are now regulating Heights Water District in a way that we weren't anticipating, or we do, or is there a difference between those? So I just call that attention to it, or that to your attention, and you can comment or just get back to us and think about that one a little more.
Okay.
So.
They're supposed to match.
Okay, all right, so you'll want to look at those two.
I'll fix that.
Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, first of all, I like the new change with the reimbursements. That's something I've talked about for a long time, about how I feel that all these people coming in later and letting it go, not developing sooner. I think this will help with that. They realize that they're going to have to pay the cost. And in a lot of respect, it's going to be, like you say, it's going to make it easier. It's predictable. They don't have to tear up the roads really that much. The line's there. And so they can just move on and start developing, so we can see development faster. I am an advocate for in perpetuity. The reason being is we're constantly maintaining and putting money into those pipes. And so, yes, they may have been developed 20, 30 years ago, but we've gone through and worked on them probably in the meantime. So I think anytime that pipe is touched, it resets it anyway, so in perpetuity would be good. So I would advocate changing that from 30 years to perpetuity. That said, I do have a couple questions on the backflow. Is that something that businesses were doing currently now, testing their water? Okay, so there's no new change in expense to the businesses. They were required to test manually. They're going to now required to test manually.
So they were required to, but a lot of people didn't. And so we have recently kind of focused on that process more. There's a lot of liability there, and it was one of those things that we just didn't do a very good job of. Staffing wise, frankly, is where it came in. We just didn't have someone that was focused on it. So now we do, and that's where we want to make sure that we have the right language in here to do that. But technically, yes, they've always been required to do it.
Do you know what the cost is to do a test like that?
I don't know what the cost is. I'll let you
Okay.
know.
My thought on this is, I mean, yes, they could probably fail as soon as you test them the next day. But, I mean, if we know how long these typically should last, maybe we do an annual or every other year or every 5-year testing. So there's not that much expenses to the business to having to do it. So I would maybe consider, and I don't know if you can do that in your regs. If this is pointing to that regs, you can do it that way. But yes, you're right, it is liability, but I think we also need to make some common sense that maybe testing every single year is maybe too much. I don't know if that is or not. Maybe they do fail, in a short period of time.
Sure, I'll look into that and I'll send you the cost of that. I believe it's on the order of hundreds of dollars, like a few $100s. I don't think it's exorbitant, but I'll send you that.
Okay. And then Merritt, I have another couple of questions here. You mentioned you're striking a lot of the stormwater regs out of there and putting them in the new regs that are coming up, and they won't be ready for a couple months, I think.
Right.
And so what happens in the interim, in the limbo where something happens? Is there anything in what we're approving, or that we'll see if they approve that these are actually still in force, but just not in the ordinance?
Right. So the way they're in here right now, they actually aren't complete enough to allow us to do it because we took out half of the references to it in 2015. So if someone comes in under an annexation, we can do just like we've been doing with the water and the sewer. So if it comes under an annexation, yes. We really don't have a lot of stormwater pipe in the areas that are currently being developed. That's the good news and the bad news, I guess. We just don't have our pipe system out that far. So most of our pipe system, if you look at our stormwater system, it's really in the core and barely outside of the core. So
Okay.
really, I don't think we're going to miss a lot.
And then you mentioned the ditches and the closing of the ditches. I guess I am a little concerned about, like you said, that maybe you don't want some of those ditches closed, because I think some of the ways to handle stormwater is actually open ditches and allowing that water to percolate. And so I am concerned that we have an ordinance. Is it every single, I mean, is ordinance open enough to allow the city or any private land, development to have their own stormwater and ditching through their system to make sure that they're not having to kind of capture it and then process it later?
So most of the ditches and drains are used for stormwater. And so any of those requirements or options or whatever need to be in the stormwater section. This is, in my mind, just a weird place for this language to be. And it's language we don't want in there. So that's why it's taken out of here. But when we bring the stormwater section back, there will be language about open ditches and drains and our use of that for storm drain in there.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. I don't see any other hands up. So one other question on the issue of reimbursement, Debbie. Whether it's in 30 years or in perpetuity, does that also apply to a developer who fronts the costs? If so, how does that work? I mean, these are corporate entities that be surprised if they last more than 10 years after the development. We don't want to be in a situation where we have to chase down a developer or even create some right of reimbursement that maybe we miss that accumulates over years and years and decades, and then we get sued for millions of dollars. We'd want to either have no such obligation or have a very clear end point, at which point they would have to speak now or forever hold their peace or somehow put the burden on them. So can you explain that process where private developers are involved?
Sure, there is, the burden is on them. We will look if we have recent language or recent contact information from them. It says in here, developers at all times provide the city a current address for purposes of mailing reimbursement. If it does not have a current address on file, the developer will not receive it. So, I mean, if they're in business 60 years from now and they have taken the time to send us a new address and it's updated, we can send them that reimbursement. But we're not going to chase anybody. You're exactly right. We don't want that administrative burden years from now. And I think we might put a little more language in there as I was reading, and I thought maybe we could come up with a little bit better language for that. But if the ownership is on them to do that.
Okay. Yeah, I can foresee that being a big issue. So,
Sure.
yeah. Yeah, and maybe we could even include language that if they have a right to reimbursement and it's not exercised within 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever, create sort of our own statute of limitations by contract. I don't see any reason we couldn't do that. We might be able to rely on some sort of contractual statute of limitations, which would be 8 years, just if this is a contract, if that's what we've created, but there's no reason we couldn't, by agreement, do something shorter, and that might help us cut off those claims before they became too big. So think about that, or talk with Gina about something like that. Any other questions for Debbie, Councilmember Denise?
Mayor, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was something I was concerned about as well on the time frame of that. But I guess the question is the developer's going to be signing a contract, I would assume, is that they're not signing a contract? So that is concerning then, because there actually isn't a contract. Ordinances really are not a contract. So I think I would be concerned about the fact that if they were due that money, based on the code up to 30 years, and just because we didn't have the address, I would think this, a lot of times in his business, if you have money that's owed someone and they are not there, you can't find them, you have to turn it over to the state. You have to sheet everything over to the state. So I would assume that we would do the same thing in that case, and not hang on to that money. Then we fulfill the obligation of, hey, you weren't there, we gave the money to the state, go to the state to go get it. And so, because it's not our money anyway.
So it is, because we have to replace the line next time. So the way it reads right now, and actually the way it reads now, before we made the change, is that any reimbursement agreement that's paid to us where we can't find the developer, the city keeps it to invest back into the water and sewer system. And so I will check with Gina and make sure that's legal, but we did run this through legal and they didn't flag that one. So, but we'll double check it again and just make sure. Obviously, the city's got the burden of taking care of that for forever. And so the next time we replace that line, that is our dollars that go toward replacement. So, but the rules and regs will define all those things. That's where some of that, you have to do this, this is the form, all that kind of thing. So we'll make sure that's in there and we'll double check the language.
Okay. Very good. Anything for Debbie before we open up for public comment on this item? Don't see anybody raising their hands. So we do want to provide an opportunity for the public to comment on item number 3, which you've just heard about these modifications into Chapter 26 of the Billings City Code. If anybody would like to comment on item number 3, please come to the podium. Any public comment on item number 3? No one is coming forward in the room, and no one is online, so we'll close the public comment period. We'll move on to item number 4, unless there's anything else from council or from staff, or nobody else is indicating they've got anything else. So thank you very much. Now we'll move on to item number 4, storm fees, billing issues.
All right, this item, Mayor and Council, is regarding staff's recommendation to move the storm fee to the property, or to the utility bill. What it is not is about fees tonight, so that will come at a much later date. And remind me, Councilmember Joy, what question were we supposed to answer for you?
Thank you. Just a little bit of a background on why this change is bringing about more, and the thing that we're really intent on achieving with this change. Thank you.
Okay, and I will go through that in the presentation, and if I still don't answer your question, then let me know. So we did go to the Budget and Finance Committee with this presentation in December. They thought it was extraordinary. Actually, they agreed with the reasons for this change, but they did ask us to change one thing in the schedule and the public input process, so we have incorporated that. So like I said, we are proposing to move the storm fee, which is now charged as an assessment on the annual property tax statement, to the monthly utility bill. Either method can be used in Montana. And so in Montana, we have Butte, Helena, and Kalispell that still charge it on the property taxes, and Bozeman, Great Falls, and Missoula who have moved it to the utility bill. So one of the primary reasons to make the change that we think is important is to increase transparency. You are going to have a lot more chance to see your fee and to get any corrections made if you're seeing your fee 12 times a year opposed to once on the property tax statement. The other thing with the property tax statement is some people don't see them at all. They get their statements mailed to the mortgage company and never look at them, so that they don't have that opportunity. And we did the same thing back in 2012 with solid waste, where we were charging the solid waste fee on the property tax statement until that time. We moved it to the utility bill, and we found that a lot of people had errors that they were being billed for an extra container or a larger container for a number of years. So they were able to catch that through the more transparent utility bill. The other very important reason that we think it's really why we started down this road was we would like to move it to the utility bill because it will be give us the ability to decrease the reserves that are needed. So this slide here shows what we would need on both the utility bill and the property assessments for reserves. So right now we are requiring about a 42% reserve for our storm fund. And that's just to keep the storm fund afloat between the 6 months of your May assessments and your November assessments. If we are charging that monthly and getting that revenue much more frequently, we can reduce the reserve to about 18%. So with no increases, if we just did that this year, we would save about $1 million. And that is money that could go back into the storm system or reduce future rate increases. And if council does eventually adopt higher rate increases in the level of services of best practices, and we increase those fees over the next 7 years, at the end of 7 years, it would save about $3.1 million of that cash that we don't have to have tied up. So we've had a number of questions about why we're doing this and who it will affect since people were first notified of it. So the first question there is, can't see it here, but how will this affect renters? So, and it really depends. A lot of times right now, landlords are already paying both the utility bills and of course they always pay the property taxes. But when they're not, it will mean that renters are going to have an increase in their utility bill. Theoretically, their rent should decrease. I don't know if it will, but all landlords are going to recover the property taxes and the rent. So theoretically, it should offset each other. And then the next one is, how will it affect disabled veterans and low-income homeowners that receive property tax assistance? And it will not affect them. They don't receive any kind of assistance on the storm assessments or street maintenance district assessments. That's not for these assessments. So they don't receive that now. It will not have any effect. And it's the same thing for not-for-profit. They have to pay the full storm fee now. They're not exempt from it, and so it won't affect them either. How will this change affect the rates? And there's been a lot of confusion around that. This change is completely independent from any rate change that council ultimately approves. So whether we're charging $5 a month or $8 or some other number, our recommendation is still to move it to the utility bill. And then why now? And that's really a timing issue with our software. We're in the process right now of changing over to a new assessment software. So we either have to do a conversion process to that, or we have to convert it to the utility bill. So if we're going to ever move it to the utility bill, now would really be the time. And then this is the slide that changed a bit since we talked to the Budget and Finance Committee and just our schedule. So if council decides tonight, just a general consensus, like, don't even bring this back. We don't want to see this again. It dies here. If you decide that you want to want us to bring it back for a vote, we would do that on January 2nd. And at that time, we would have the ordinance amendments and a public hearing. Then if you passed it then, on second reading, it would be on the February 12th agenda, and then we would not begin charging it on the utility bill until July 1st. And then our plan is to target really the group of people that would be most affected. So we have the Landlords Association and Realtors probably that we would do the outreach to during the January period before the public hearing, as well as additional public outreach later, just to remind people of what's going on. The storm utility program and the fees and the methodology and all that, that is a completely separate public hearing or public input process where we will be doing that, on its own schedule once we actually figure out what the fee impacts really will be. So if council does want this to come back, what we'd be bringing back is amendments to Chapter 22 of City Code, where we'd be revising the billing from the property assessments to the utility bill. And then in that code section also, we'd be revising the methodology from specifying that we use zoning and square footage to be set by resolution. And that is all we have for you, and we're here for questions.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Absolutely spectacular presentation. Actually, that's a pretty cool picture there. I'm sure we've got some questions for Jennifer. Councilmember Gillick?
So I do have questions from Rimrock Neighborhood Task Force. I know there's others that from Heights as well. So one of them relates to property taxes in terms of there being a deduction that one can get, and if we were shifting from paying for stormwater assessments that are on the property taxes versus utility bill, how does that affect can your deduction, and I guess what would be the sources you would cite in terms of the information?
Councilmember Golick, while we don't offer tax advice to anybody, what we would say is that it should have no effect. And that if you believe those assessments are deductible now, it doesn't matter if the piece of paper they're shown on is the property tax statement or if it's on a utility bill. It would still be the same. If you don't believe it now, you're probably not going to believe it when it changes to the utility bill. But it would have no effect. It does not have to be on the property tax statement to be deductible.
I'm sorry, did you have a list of questions or?
No, I'm sorry. I guess that was, but let's see if I think I'm trying to see if you answered the other questions. Well, I guess maybe here's a more specific one. Since there's still the second half of the 2023 taxes due in May, will taxpayers essentially have double billing or an escalation of billing amount during the transition?
Councilmember Golick, on that one, we pass the storm fees for 1 year. So back in June, Council approved the storm fees and the resolution that went into effect for FY24. So that was for service July 1, 23 to June 30th, 2024. So while it's split over the two time periods, the November and May, you're actually mostly paying those in arrears. So in other words, June 30th is the ending of this resolution, and July 1 is where we'd pick up with the utility bill if passed.
And so for their fall property taxes would be reduced, but not entirely in terms of the stormwater assessment?
If we change this to the utility bill effective July 1st, there would be no storm assessment on their fall taxes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, was that the end, Councilmember Gillick? Okay, Councilmember Owen? And okay, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. During your presentation, you mentioned you're going to save $1 million up to $3 million. Can you, I'm really having a difficult time understanding how by decreasing the reserves, because typically if you have money in reserves, you're earning a lot of interest on it. And I guess I'd be interested to know how much a year the stormwater reserves actually earn in interest. Because to me, I'm thinking that we're actually losing that revenue source by not having reserves. But how are we actually saving money, lowering the cost of the operations?
Councilmember Neese, I don't have the interest number, but it's very low. It's lower than the inflation amount. So if we can invest that back into the storm system, rather than holding it in reserves, we are offsetting the inflation costs that we would see by not doing that. So you're really being able to use that money. Holding reserves is never a revenue source for you. You're not going to generate more revenue than if you're able to use that for a purpose.
Okay, so you're saying the cost of the earnings on those reserves are outweighed by the cost of the inflation by having to hold it until you can then pay for a project that you've done?
Correct. The other possibility is it doesn't increase our capital spending at all or put anything into the storm system, but it could just offset future rate increases as well, either way.
Okay, so if we switch to this billing process and mid-year a stormwater break happens or something happens where you need to invest, $10 million into a stormwater repair, can the city council then approve outside the budget and then have the stormwater fees go up, 2 or 3 times a year, or is it just once a year like it is now?
Councilmember Neese, if needed, you could do a mid-year adjustment on the utility bill.
Unlike a tax statement, you can't really, it would be very, very difficult to do.
Right, we're locked in once a year on that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Rowan.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, I just want to clarify that I think at the Budget Committee, we discussed you also reaching out to task forces as a part of this early public outreach. So I would just hope and encourage that you would do that, since I know certainly there's a number of them that have those questions and concerns. I did want to raise a question that came from the Heights Task Force that I think actually hasn't been discussed yet. If we're holding now in reserves based on property tax assessments, and the move to a utility bill brings the amount we have to hold in reserve, what happens to the money? What's the plan to bring the reserves down, essentially?
So, Councilmember Owen, we don't have a specific plan yet until we get through more of phase 3 of the storm program update and figure out exactly what those rate impacts are and what our capital plan would be. It was, based on estimates last time we talked to you. So we would bring you back with whatever that plan was. Is it just offsetting some of those increases? Is it able to actually do an influx into our storm system sooner so we can get to some of these problem areas sooner? That would be something that we'd have to discuss, and we have not done that yet.
So do you anticipate we would see that analysis approximately when you bring the proposal for the new fee structure, or would it be during approximately budget time? Approximately when would we see that analysis?
Councilmember Owen, I might be overly optimistic, but in order to get everything done, we needed it quickly. So I am hoping March or April.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for Jennifer? Councilmember Ripsis?
Thank you, Mayor. So we didn't really talk about this now, but I think it's part of the same conversation. Is this idea that we're changing it from being charged or assessed based on square footage or zoning to something else that we're going to set by resolution? But I think all our talk has been that we're going to use an estimate of square footage of impermeable, surface on people's lots, and are we going to use an average for residential number?
So yes, Councilmember Repsis, that was part of the other conversation with the storm program, where our recommendation, and I think council agreed with that concept, was to move it to charging based on impervious area with an equivalent residential unit. So all residentials would be considered the same.
All right, so if I could, Mayor, I think when we do that, I mean, the idea behind a utility is you should have some amount of control over how much that you're using, right? You can, your water utility, you can decrease your water usage and reduce your water bill. And if we're going to treat stormwater as a utility, we really ought to do the same type of thing. If somebody installs water collection, tanks on their house, so they're capturing that instead of letting that run off into the stormwater system. If they install, pervious sidewalks or driveway material, that kind of thing, we should have a plan to get to the point where we can credit people for those, right? And we may not be there on July 1st, but I think we need to be able to be thinking about how do we get to a point where we can credit people for those investments in their houses that are helping us all in the reduced need for stormwater facilities?
Yeah, Councilmember Upsis, we can certainly take another look at that, and we did with the Stormwater Advisory Committee. At this time, we decided it would just be too much of an administrative burden to be worth the effort to get that credit. But we can look at it some more.
It looks like Chris would like to comment on that topic.
So Mayor and Council, what I'd add to that, and consistent, is that Jennifer earlier commented about the transparency of the utility bill. I don't know that transparency is exactly the right word, but I think the fact that going to impervious surface, going to calculations that you have some control over, whether they're commercial and ultimately evolve into residential at a higher level, I think is where you really see that monthly impact rather than waiting for the annual. And that's what I've seen previously in creating a stormwater utility, is that is what provided earlier the businesses, and probably to be extreme, the big businesses with lots of asphalt or lots of concrete. They're the first who see it and pay attention, but ultimately, if the system, if it's best for the community and the system, for that system to continue to be refined, the equity of it is improved as you have a direct correlation between what our costs are or the public's cost is and who's paying. And that's easier dealt with, I think, on a utility monthly impact rather than the annual tax side. There's arguments both sides, but I think there's a connection there ultimately. And what I've seen from others, both the ones I've been involved in and ones I've not been involved in, is it takes some time to go from this place at which we treat everything the way we do to ultimately getting to a refinement of separating commercial, sizes of commercial, residential, large multifamily residential, et cetera, so.
Okay, Councilor Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. Since we're only talking about whether to be billed once a year or 12 months, I brought my tax statement. My stormwater is $62.42 a year. So I'm not going to worry about taxes on $62. So income tax doesn't mean anything for me as an individual. Divide by 12, it's $5.20 a month. Whether I pay $62 a year or $5.20 a month, as an individual, I don't see this as a problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your comments. I just have this really big need to continue to talk about this. Anyway, I still want you to, I think there's a kind of listening, and I appreciate Councilmember Rupsis's comments about trying to seeing this as a utility means as you use less, say in the instance of water, you see that kind of connection between the two. So what's the connection between, really big picture, what's the connection between us having only stormwater a system infrastructure in the core of the city and not having it farther out? And our residents, people who own property, their real interests in that. We can see that we're talking about costs, we're talking about whether that cost shifts, but what is the real interest in us having good stormwater infrastructure? Thank you.
Councilmember Joy, we could pull up the presentation from October, but I think we'll send it out just as a refresher too. There's a couple things. First of all, we have been very reactive in our storm system. So what that means, though, is when something happens, like a culvert collapses, it's going to be far more expensive to repair it after it collapses than if we would catch it before. So we want to go to what is considered best practices, a system where we're proactive, we're looking at these things. Ultimately, it lowers the cost to citizens because we catch these earlier. The other part of it is the flooding and the problem areas that we have to fix some of that. So we have a number of homeowners that would come forward and talk about the flooding that they've had year after year, and that we've just not been able to get to. You know, right now we might say, well, we can be there in 15 years with the funding we have.
If I could just add two to that, Mayor and
ahead, Chris.
Council, one would be, it is EPA regulated. So these regulations have been coming down since, I mean, my first years in this business in the early 90s, cities over 1 million were being regulated by the EPA. We are being regulated by the EPA. So there are regulations that we have to comply with. The other thing is we want the Yellowstone River to be clean. We want our environment to be clean. So the standards are directly tied to a clean environment relative to drinking water, relative to waterways, et cetera, et cetera. So those are two, you said big picture, they are big picture, they are long-term, but they're components of having a stormwater system that you're managing and being deliberate about how the system is being built out to meet both the EPA regulations, DEQ regulations, as well as wanting to be good stewards to ultimately what we impact, in this case, you know, the longest free-flowing river in the United States of America. And it matters what the test results are relative to what goes into the river. Thank you.
So we really want Livingston and Big Timber to adopt these, being upstream, I guess, in particular. Well, not this. This is, again, only this very narrow billing issue on, that we're talking about tonight. Let's open up for public comment. For anybody who's interested in addressing, in particular, that narrow billing question. So, yeah.
I'm very interested. Pam Ellis, Heights resident. As you can tell from my emails in the past, I disagree with Jennifer's analysis. I worked as a tax preparer for 6 years. We had in-service from people from the Montana Department of Revenue every year. We take the stormwater assessment off the property. That's included as part of the property tax statement. I sent you the document from the Montana Department of Revenue, which makes it absolutely clear that those special assessments are considered part of the property tax. Is it going to be more transparent? Are you kidding me? I mean, the example was, well, when we went to the trash collection, people found out they were being charged for an extra trash can. You're moving to a square footage system. Some people will be winners, some people will be losers, but everybody's going to be charged the same amount. So it doesn't matter whether it shows up on a monthly basis or at the end of the year, it's the same amount. There's nothing to correct. What does matter is the impact on taxpayers. That the spending that you did last year resulted in a 20, when you had an email from a constituent who said, my property assessment went up 51%, my taxes went up 36%. Several of you sent notices to Andy Zeller, who said, well, actually the state was accountable for 5% of that because they transferred 5% of the property tax assessments back to residential. So really, and when you look at the fees that we reduced, you only increased 29%. That was your spending. And the next spending is predicted to be 22% for fiscal year 24. So the question that individual asked is anyone concerned for taxpayers on a fixed income, average or below average wages, who are struggling to keep everything together? That's what we're asking you to pay attention to. Yes, it will impact low-income people. It will impact, I mean, this is the first year, because I'm a tax preparer, I've started my taxes. This is the first year that our deductions have gone over the standard deduction of $25,000. And a big kick to that was our property taxes went up so dramatically. No, I'm not going to qualify for reduced property taxes. The biggest benefit to people is when they can go into the Department of Revenue, and it's a calculation of how much you pay in property taxes versus your income. Elderly homeowners and renters credit have a similar thing. It only applies to your first $325,000 of property. There's not a house in Bozeman that is valued at that. They're all well above, the mean is 894,000. I think ours is at 350. It's had a huge impact on people. What I particularly am offended by is Chris's memo of November 10th that said, hey, we're going to make this change unless you write me and tell me. And if you don't say anything, then I'm going to vote, then consider that that's a yes vote. So I turned in a public information request, got no response. I'm asking that you are going to impact people in a negative way with this change. What I'm asking, if you're going to do it, take a public vote and be publicly accountable. Yes, we can file an open records dispute, but that just requires you to take a public vote. Please do that. Please don't just act behind the scenes. You had since November 10th to know this is coming and take a public vote. Please do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment on item number 4? Mr. Smith.
Mayor, Council. TJ Smith, resident of the Heights, chair of the Heights Task Force. I'd just like to state that the Heights Task Force voted unanimously to oppose the billing switch. I don't know what that is worth to you, but I would like to state that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? No one is coming forward. No one is online, so we'll close the public comment on item number 4. And back to council, we do need some discussion. We're not all here, but we've still got a large portion. Staff wants to know whether to proceed along this line. Again, it's nothing to be approved tonight. That would have to come with that public vote at a future business meeting. But council, what's your pleasure? Do you want to give any direction to staff? Do you want to have any general discussion? Councilmember Neese.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to direct staff not to proceed forward with moving this from annual tax assessments to monthly billing.
Okay. Very good. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Tidswell. Councilmember Neese and Tidswell, did you want to speak to your motion?
I do. Thank you, Mayor. I think it's been said here tonight that there is going to be impact to our residents and citizens in a tax way, in several different ways, not just deductibility, but I think this is going to hit our low-income homeowners really the most. I've recently went to a seniors event, and we have seniors telling us how they're about to lose their houses now because of the higher taxes and the cost of the government that is getting so much as taxing them out of their homes. I don't know what to tell them when they tell you this, and they can't go out and get a second job. They can't, sell more items to make and increase their revenue like a lot of us can. And so I think when we are putting this forward to the residents, we need to really be accountable to all of our residents, not just those that can afford it. We can afford to pay the $60 or $5 a month extra on their bill. So because as we know that it is what it is now, this is what the current rate is. Remember, the council approved to increase that $178 million over the next 6 or 7 years, and that's going to go from $5 all the way up to, probably $20 a month and that. So it is a lot of coming that way. And I think the transparency argument of being, having it come out monthly, if it was a true utility, there may be some real, that could make sense. But I think, this is not a utility now unless this city council or the staff is somehow planning to this become a true utility where they are going to start regulating and change the current rates that they have now to more focus in on larger houses that maybe, send the water off into the street, or maybe houses that don't have any stormwater going off, they can actually then don't have to pay the fee. Things like that, that becomes then a true utility. But at this point in time, it's not a true utility. It's a public benefit. It's an assessment that is good for everyone. Just because I don't have stormwater drains in my street doesn't mean that I don't benefit because there's stormwater being collected and moved from downtown so that I can go downtown or I can go across town and visit my friends and neighbors. It's important that this is a community cost that is borne that way. I think that when we look at having this impact like this, again, I want to say I don't believe it's a utility, and I believe we need to keep it where it's at on the taxes. As was said, these assessments are considered property taxes and are deductible. It will impact everyone in the city who does do deductibility on their taxes. I've looked into a little bit of what was said here tonight about the qualifications for low income, and it will impact those low income people applying for that low income assistance. And that whole idea of the state giving that low income program is to help alleviate people with low income to be able to stay in their homes. And what's happened over the years has been, we can see Kalispell and Butte and Helena has now moved some of their cost of government from the tax rolls over into these assessments that are not being counted in this low income calculation. The state legislators looking at that and seeing that. And they're going to probably have to take a look at this and find out why are the cities bypassing this and then impacting what these low incomes really should be qualifying for. And so the more the cities act in ways to find ways to shift funds from the tax rolls into assessments, the more the state legislator is going to clamp down on cities to make laws to prevent us from doing things like that. And I think that we need to act in good faith for the state laws and understand what they want. So I do not support moving this, and I would hope others would support me as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Tidswell?
I don't think I can add anything to that. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion. Councilmember Ripsis.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but Councilmember Neese, I think all of that was pretty much wrong. A quick Google search shows that assessments that are considered by the federal government, regardless of what the state considers the federal government, are not deductible. Now, probably most of us actually use the total dollar amount, but they're technically not supposed to be. So there's no impact, and we've gotten this from legal or somebody on the low-income property assistance program. This assessments are not included in that. It doesn't impact that. And this last thing, I can't even remember what the last thing was all about. Was I'm sorry, but there's the idea of moving assessments to a utility bill is bad because the state legislature is going to crack down on stuff like that. Like, it's already an assessment. If they're going to crack down on assessments, they would have done it already. These are unregulated or they're not controlled by the state. And if they're concerned about assessments, they already would have been doing it for stormwater fees. So really, none of that jumble there was, I mean, it seems to be coming from a good place, but it just doesn't seem to be accurate based on what we've heard, which is very disappointing. I think this is a very simple change. There are going to be some people that hit that $10,000 SALT deduction limit on the federal tax that now get that extra $60 worth of deduction, which will have a few dollars benefit to them. So they will be impacted by that. But if you're already paying over $10,000 in state and local taxes, I'm sorry, I'm probably thinking of that backwards, right? You're paying under $10,000 in state and local taxes, and then you're going to get the benefit still. It just doesn't. I'm sorry, but that was an inaccurate statement, and I think we owe it to the taxpayers to really understand the impacts here. And they're being overstated for some reason. I don't know why. This is a simple change. We did it with our solid waste, as Jennifer indicated, 10 or so years ago, and there hasn't been an uproar. It's been a benefit to have that on our utility bill as opposed to our property tax statement. So I'm not going to support this. I think the staff should go ahead and do this. I'm not really sure where the concern is coming from. The actual tax impact is not there. And people should not be concerned about this. It's simply an administrative change. Now, when we get to the point where we're talking about how much are we going to increase the stormwater assessments, that's a different story, right? That's where we're going to have an impact on people. This, what we're talking about here tonight, nobody is going to notice. So I'm going to be against this motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion on the motion? Councilmember Gillick.
I guess maybe also just I too won't support the motion. I don't see it as, I mean, Councilmember Neese is bringing up questions of affordability, which I don't think this particular issue is germane to, as Councilmember Roops has said, the ultimate storm assessments. We need to increase our funding for our stormwater infrastructure. I would argue that it'll be for protecting the taxpayer and protecting us from washed out roads that cost even more in a sort of reactive approach. But that's not what today's about. But furthermore, I think when it does come time for us to discuss whether or not to increase our stormwater assessment, we may decide that is really important, but maybe other things are not as important, and we may reduce assessments elsewhere. I mean, it's not a foregone conclusion, even at the point that we decide what to do with stormwater fees, the amounts there. So anyhow, good discussion. I think there's going to be further things to discuss, but I won't support the motion.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Rowan?
Thank you, Mayor. I think a little statement and then maybe a question, and I'm not sure if it can be answered tonight. So when we discussed this in the Budget and Finance Committee, Finance Director Zeller was there and shared essentially what you've heard tonight is that based on his understanding of Montana law, if the stormwater fee is charged on an annual property tax statement, or if it is charged on a monthly utility bill, its deductibility doesn't change. If it was deductible when it was on the property tax bill, that doesn't change by going to the utility bill. I actually consulted with private CPAs who had the exact same opinion, that the deductibility doesn't change based on when and how it's billed. Whether it was deductible in the first place is probably an open question. But what I'm less clear on, and what maybe staff can respond to, is this question of the tax relief, which is separate and apart from deductibility. So I think I'm still a little uncertain on that.
So Councilmember Owen, we could argue if it's a tax assessment, and it really doesn't matter for that, because the property tax assistance program ultimately lowers your taxable value. And neither of our assessments, storm or SMDs, use taxable value. So it would never apply to any of our storm assessments. We do get calls every year from people who want to know why they didn't get any kind of adjustment off of their storm fee, and we explain that to them. But they do not right now.
Does it impact who qualifies for the program?
I do not know the answer to that.
Can we get an answer to that?
We can.
Okay, thank you. I want to go back and look at Pam's information you got from Department of Revenue. I'll also oppose this just because I don't want to kill this baby in the cradle. But it will be interesting to go back and read that. I did a quick Google search myself to sort of get a sense of the scale of people who don't use a standard deduction, for whom this is even an issue. I don't know what that is in Montana, but nationally it's about 10% of taxpayers are itemizing anymore with the increase in the standard deduction. So that's the group that we're talking about, minus those who will not cap out. In other words, they've got to have room for an extra deduction. Just because you have because you may already be beyond any sort of cap. So something less than 10%, if that national number applies in Montana, presumably it does, is who we're talking about. Again, scale-wise, it doesn't seem like a lot, and that only may be on the state level, not the federal level. I always understood that only ad valorem taxes are deductible. In other words, things based on the value of your property. Of course, this is not based, it's based on zoning and square footage, and then maybe in the future permeability. So I don't quite understand why these would be deductible in any event, but it is interesting that maybe that deductibility or lack of deductibility wouldn't be impacted. So anyway, I'm not too concerned, but it will be interesting to kind of continue to chew on that, try to get some sense maybe for the scale, how much we're talking about impacting our customers. I normally want to defer to staff on these sorts of relatively minor technical issues if possible, but we can continue to chew on it in the future. So further discussion on this before we vote on that motion? Okay. Then the motion was to direct staff not to continue. I don't know that we need an affirmative vote if this fails or not, but the first thing before us is the motion at hand to direct staff not to continue on this switch. Councilmember Ripsis?
I'm sorry, maybe we should just do this in terms of more of affirmative vote, which they tend to prefer, so I'd offer a substitute motion to direct staff to move forward with the stormwater fee change.
Okay, and I guess that would have the same effect. In reverse, is there a second for that substitute motion? By Councilmember Joy, okay, makes the second. So this has been flipped to the affirmative to proceed. So if in favor of the Councilmember Rips' substitute motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Voting in opposition, Councilmembers Neese.
Yes.
Okay, so Councilmember Neese is in opposition only. So, all right, well then, that's at least marching orders for the staff at present, anyway. One issue I guess I would have is the pace. I don't know if we need more time. My understanding is the Budget Committee's direction or suggestion was to move forward as quickly as possible. Not as quickly as possible. So if this got moved back, that's not the end of the world or something. Councilmember Cohen, can you,
Sure.
since you're part of that committee, can you
So
comment?
to be clear, the Budget and Finance Committee doesn't direct staff. We just offer, and our recommendation for council's consideration, the recommendation we made to staff is to do more public engagement. I heard tonight, and I just want to be real clear that unless something's changed, I don't anticipate anything other than public votes. All of our votes are public. There's no cloakroom kind of voting here, and I think the concern that we had discussed is a change of this significance requires some more public input. So I think we had asked that staff not rush, that they spend some time talking to the public, answering questions, engaging critical stakeholders like you heard tonight with the realtors and the home builders to ensure there's nothing that we're missing. I don't think our recommendation at all, unless the other council members recall differently, was to hurry. I think it was the opposite. Take your time and talk to the public.
Okay, because I was seeing on that time frame some expectation this would actually come to a vote at our January 22nd meeting, but what I'm hearing is that was not necessarily the recommendation of the Budget Committee.
I don't think we felt strongly about that. I think what our focus was more on was the public engagement. Staff have timelines they have to meet, and so we didn't want to disrupt that. So I think what they proposed here was a sort of parallel track of public engagement and starting some votes. Is that fair?
Councilmember Owen, yes, that's fair. I will say, though, that we really only scheduled it for January 22nd to do it at the same time as our other ordinance amendment. Does not have to be done that way. In fact, I would have preferred actually to probably kick it to February. I don't want to wait too late because we are going to have to start work now on it. And I don't want to, waste some of that effort if council does not approve it.
Okay. All right, thank you. So we'll leave that, I guess, to staff, but there's no reason to delay unless there's a reason to delay. But if there's reason to delay, especially to get some of these questions answered, engage the public more, all the better. So, okay, does that conclude item number 4? Then we'll look to Chris on item number 5, highlights of our upcoming agenda items.
Just cover it briefly. You've already got your packets, cemetery rules and regulations, or we've got, I think, 4 or 5 action items. That's one of them. There's a couple of zone changes, one related off of Avenue B. The other is related to parking tied to one of our Stockman banks. They went through the zoning commission process with, I think, full recommendations to you. And last but certainly not least, you'll be electing a deputy mayor pro tem per our code at next week's meeting. And then I'll just repeat briefly how important the January 16, Tuesday night at the library, the focus will be on crime prevention. Our previous meeting focused really on our criminal justice system partners. This is broadening out to the true prevention side of the equation. So,
and Chris, since you're going to be identifying people to partner with us on that, can we encourage council members to engage with you if they think there's particular organizations or individuals who should be part of that conversation?
Absolutely. Part of what I think is a more significant challenge here, like I said, when it came to the criminal justice system, we know what our interface is with the county, the city, the state, the feds, et cetera. When it comes to this broader discussion of crime prevention, those are not as easily identified. So I absolutely welcome any guidance, and the more I can hear from you, or the more we invite those partners in, I think there's going to be more learning there, whereas last time I think there was more listening and sharing with the collaboration, the partnerships.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Brown.
Mayor, if I could just ask a question. I continue to hope that these highlight periods will look a little further into the future than just next week, because we can read the agenda for next week. But I'm particularly curious about when we might see, what kind of timing is on some of these new housing regulations. There's been a lot of stories about injunctions and, some things getting held off and others not. I'm not totally deep in the weeds on it enough to know, but I'm curious when we might start seeing some of that, if we have thoughts on the injunctions that have been issued, how it impacts planning. When might those conversations start coming to council?
Thank you, Councilmember Owens, and I just saw those this afternoon as well. So yes, the point I'm taking from you is talk at a higher level relative to issues coming to the council over the next 30, 60 days.
I think that would be great, but specifically if legal has thoughts on the lawsuits, I know there's some named plaintiffs from Billings, how they impact planning. I would love to hear an update. It doesn't have to be during a work session, it could be by email, but I'm curious as to how the behind the scenes work on the growth plan is impacted by any of this.
Thank you.
And if Gina wants to comment and has anything, please feel free right now.
I'm sorry, Mayor and Council, I just learned of the injunctions today as well, so I need to read it more in depth. And Wyeth and I think, are doing that right now, so.
Okay, very good, thank you. Councilor Manise?
Thank you, Mayor. During the legislative session, the committee and the city at the time were in opposition of those bills anyway, in a lot of respect, because it was really disrupting what we'd done with Recode. And so I would assume the city would look forward to looking and maybe even participating in that, because it did interrupt, and the city worked hard to try to negotiate different ways to get things done within those bills, and in the end, the legislature passed what they passed. And so I would hope that the city would look at this as an opportunity to kind of get back and regain what the city had done with Recode, and kind of get control back over their city. So that's on that. But I did have, Chris, a question about the agenda. Since we did have some absences here, would this not be the time that we want to add that? Do we want to have another ceremony of swearing in, or do you want to just make it private and have them go to the clerk?
Yeah, I talked with Chris about this a little bit. Councilmember Aspinleader, or future Councilmember, I guess, had talked with Denise about scheduling something individually. And I talked with Councilmember Kennedy when he called to say that he was stuck in Oregon because of the weather, that we would put that on our next agenda on Monday, which would require a change to our agenda that night. And I think what the plan was to give them their choice. if they would like to do it between now and then, or just Monday night.
Okay.
And hopefully they'll do the same, but if they don't, that's fine too. And then also Councilmember Shaw as well. So my guess is we'll do something Monday night, 6 days from today.
Okay. And then one more thing regarding the meeting on the public safety. I think the last time, I was not there, I was in Zoom, and I'd asked, that we had more of the leaders of the religious organizations attending these meetings. And I don't know if you've looked at reaching out to some of them and some of those organizational groups. Those are the ones I think that need to be part of the community to help in the areas where the city and the police are not going to reach, and help to prevent a lot of that stuff from even happening.
Very good. Thank you, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And I wasn't sure, because this is a work session, if we wanted to acknowledge the passing of Paul Reeder. And maybe that would be for our next courtesy on our next meeting, but the passing of Paul Reeder. Paul Reeder was also a chairman and officer of the Black Heritage Foundation for many years, and so maybe we could work that into a courtesy. Thank you.
That'd be great, and I would ask you to try to organize that if you can, or feel free to, if you'd like to. Okay, anything else on number 5? Is there any public comment on item number 5? Don't see anything, so council discussion. Any items of other council discussion? Okay, any public comment on anything that wasn't on our agenda tonight? Any public comment on non-agenda items? Nobody's online, no one's coming forward. Then with that, council, members of the public, thank you for being with us. We are adjourned before 7:30.